We're on Hackney Marshes, probably the biggest area of amenity sports grass in the UK, certainly in London. Primarily used for football, cricket, some rugby, but in addition to that, it's also really important for wildlife. The North Marsh Habitats project evolved about 5 years ago when the new sports pavilion was built. I said to Hackney, you've done everything Sport England asked, but there was very little done for the benefit of wildlife. What we're looking at, particularly with the North Marsh Habitats project, is looking to create links, habitat links, particularly east and west across the marshes, for key species that are either in decline or potentially struggling. We're building bee hotels, we're building low nutrient substrates for wildflowers, hedgehog houses, big loggeries which will support loads of insects which will be useful in their own right, but also as food for other vertebrates. And we've put a big new pond in. The value you get from putting a pond is amazing. Really useful for things like toads which are struggling, newts, grass snakes might pop in, and of course it's a water source for every other animal that might need a drink. With all the deadwood habitat and all the soil heaps that came out of the pond, using them as habitat around the pond, you're adding so much with one effort. The main structural elements that we've been looking at are wetland, so that's your pond, but also some wet scrapes, so very, very shallow ponds. They're filled with wood. The wood keeps the water like a sponge, and so even in dry periods it's relatively damp. Then you've got the pollinator element, primarily focused on bees, but it's not just about bees. Where we are now, this is a model wildlife car park bay. This is the sort of stuff which has been pioneered by an amazing landscaper, John Little. I've been hoping to work with John for many years, and we finally managed to get a project together here on the marshes.
Most of this area is on heavy clay, so it's quite fertile. So we've created a low fertility, sandy landscape that we're hoping is going to bring in lots of species that aren't actually here because they don't have space to nest in. And we've used pretty much all recycled materials. We've filled the gabions with local houses instead of using mined gabion stone. So we're not bringing this stuff from miles away. We've used reclaimed tropical hardwood for the edge and for the solitary bee posts. There's 3 reclaimed hardwoods we've got. One is called a pepe, one is jarrow and one is eki. A pepe is from West Africa. These are all reclaimed from our docks. We brought it back, built our industry with it, and now it's being taken down, so we're repurposing that. They are the most beautiful timber. Incredibly long lasting, incredibly durable. So perfect actually for putting habitat for solitary bees because they produce beautifully clean holes, and the woodpeckers and some of the species that would want to come and take the solitary bees, they can't get into the wood, it's so hard. And then we've got jarrow, which is an Australian timber, the classic railway sleeper timber. So this edging along the front here is jarrow, cleaned up for this project. We've got crushed concrete, which is used within the building industry essentially as a sub-base. Crushed ceramics, which is toilets, sinks, all that kind of sanitary ware that has to be separated in demolition. And we are using these construction materials to grow plants. These materials feel like you shouldn't be able to grow plants. It feels all wrong to use this stuff, but actually it creates a low fertility, slightly stressed substrate, and that creates incredibly interesting flora. The other thing we've used is this, which is thanet sand, which is beautifully fine with a little bit of clay in. This particular sand is the most popular for ground nesting bees. We've put it in a corner of the gabion, very sheltered and on a south-facing bank. Perfect place for ground nesting bees. If you create a contrasting landscape, then you're going to add to the biodiversity. If you create a landscape that's the same as what's around you, in essence, you're just adding to the biomass. So this wonderful contrast is what delivers more biodiversity. The other thing we hope is that it's going to stimulate the discussion. It's an interesting space. It's not just a landscape. This is a demonstration garden. The big picture is about persuading developers and highways to say, when you demolish materials, why don't we landscape with the waste instead of it being taken away? It's not only reusing the waste, it's the fact that these materials deliver biodiversity. Counterintuitively, from a gardening point of view, because it feels like you need organic material, you need topsoil, certainly from a wildflower point of view, you create a lot more diversity of plant species in more stressed, lower nutrient soils. This whole project in Hackney, right next to where I used to look after a housing estate, has been amazing. To do something so close to where so many people live, that's the joy of it.
This project also links to other projects, such as the Old Lea River restoration project, which Gideon and Wildlife Gardeners of Haggerston are leading on, and a whole series of other things that have been done around the marshes. So we've got the wetland, we've got the wildlife gardens in the parking bay and next to the pavilion. Then in addition to that, we've put in a bee garden up at Friends Bridge, right on the tip of North Marsh. This is a giant bee hotel. Bees that like nesting horizontally in dead wood, things like leafcutter bees and mason bees, they want to be more than a metre above the ground. So it's built on a platform of the rubble which we took out when we were digging the pond. These are recycled old bollards, and we'll be drilling these with holes which bees will nest in. And so we'll drill anything from a millimetre diameter hole up to about 10 millimetres diameter. The other advantage of this being really quite big is it gives people an opportunity to understand what's going on. It's a very visual way of people interacting. These bollards were in Springfield Park. They're towards the end of their useful life as bollards, but there's still a lot of wood in here, so they'll make perfectly good bee hotels. That bee garden sits within a new nature reserve. Effectively what we've done is we've taken a hectare of amenity grass, which wasn't being used for sports because it's in the wrong position, there's too many paths around it. Back in December we planted about 350 trees, little areas of woodland, which will first of all will scrub up and eventually become higher canopy, and they will act as stepping stones to link the woodlands that already exist on the east and the west of the marsh. Where we've planted the trees, there's been no mowing and the grass has been allowed to come up round them and the wildflowers are coming through. In addition to the copses, which are just beginning to grow, we've put in big log piles. Deadwood is a fantastic habitat. It's a habitat in its own right in that there are fungi and beetles that eat the wood. But when you pile the wood together, and particularly if you pile it together by creating cavities underneath, you create habitats for species like the vertebrates, wood mice, voles, shrews, and we've already had plenty of sightings of common shrews and hedgehogs in this area. By creating these big log piles, which are fenced to stop people taking the logs or disturbing the logs, you've got these refugia, which help those mammals build up their populations quite quickly. And of course, they then will be food for other things, such as kestrels and weasels. So you're building up the whole basis of the food chain. It's been a fantastic project to deliver. Effectively, we've created a new 1 hectare nature reserve and beefed up the habitat value of the existing sink. One of the key aims was to make sure that we don't change the character of the marshes. So when we put in the stepping stone copses, there are very big sight lines between those copses, so you don't lose the vistas, you don't have a significant change to the environment for people, but you do the tweaks that you need for the wildlife. So it's a win-win, and the response we're getting from people is very, very positive. People are intrigued, people are excited. The people who know a bit more are really positive because they can see why what we're doing is really beneficial. The people who know a little bit less about wildlife are really interested to learn a bit more. And generally speaking, there's very much an objective that everyone benefits from this. It's not a question of kind of conflict between people and wildlife. It's about benefiting wildlife without conflicts. This is one in a series of projects looking at really landscape scale conservation on Hackney marshes. What we're doing through all of these interventions, whether it's on the river, on the land or with a new pond, is we're creating habitat for existing species to make sure they're more resilient, they've got much more habitat, but also looking at the future, whether there are species which we've lost that could come back. It's so rare to have an opportunity to be able to create a 1 hectare new nature reserve, and that's what we've got here. We've extended the site of importance for nature conservation by 100 metres into the marshes. There are opportunities to do this sort of stuff in London, but to do it on this scale and to do it in such a coordinated fashion where you're linking everything together often isn't done. The reason we've been able to do it is because we're working with local people who understand the local ecology and with experts who know how to build this stuff. So it's a massive win. There's massive pressures on local authorities, lack of funding, and where Hackney have been very positive is they've let local people who know what they're doing get on with it. So effectively, this hasn't cost Hackney very much. They have contributed, but essentially we're drawing in funding because we know what we're doing and we can command that funding. And Hackney has basically just said, okay, go ahead. They love what we're doing, we love what we're doing. Who wouldn't? It's a win for nature. And there are no downsides in the sense that there's plenty of amenity grass here. And actually we're enhancing this part of the amenity grass for people because it adds a bit of diversity, not just mown grass. So it's win-win all round.